Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus episode 209, the most anticipated films of 2026. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new episode of Film Focus in the year 2026. Woo! Happy New Year of the late variety, but I hope your first week of January has been off to a good start. With 2026 comes a fascinating brew of new films that will hopefully delight, excite, and entertain from now until the end of the year. And as with any time January comes around, we got to talk about our most anticipated films. And I think my list has been mostly set in stone since around the latter side of 2025. But I think a few entries have moved around here and there. And as with most times with these lists, I would say there are a few that may end up swapping around here and there. But unlike previous years, I think most of these films all have a set release to show up in this year, save for one, which we will get to shortly. But as per usual, I have a nice little array of mostly popular entries because that's the kind of stuff I'm into. But that's not to say that there won't be any, sort of smaller or hidden films that will show up during the year that might take the top 10 spot when it comes to my favorite films when we get to December of this year. But hey ho, without further ado, let's stop rambling and actually start talking about these top 10 films. Alright, so now we're starting out with number 10, which is GOAT, the next film from Sony Pictures Animation, and this one features an anthropomorphic goat who basically wants to play a basketball-like sport called Rawball and become the greatest of all time. I didn't actually see the trailer for this until very, very recently, within the last month or so, when I was in the cinema, and I like the art style, I like the creativity of the animation, and the color scheme looks cool. The voice cast looks interesting, and yeah, anytime that Sony Pictures Animation are making something, I am in. I'm very curious to see how this pans out, and I'm hoping that it's going to be a good time. So then moving on to entry number 9, we have Resident Evil. Now, with this film, it's set to show up in September 2026. From what I can see, the official release date is supposed to be the 18th of September this year, but there's a lot riding on it in some subtle ways. Probably not to the larger, film public, but for me as not even a casual Resident Evil fan because I've barely played any of the games. I'm more of a fan of the aesthetic, the lore, and some of the other interesting elements. I like watching people play Resident Evil, but I'm just too much of a coward to even dabble in that area. But the reason I'm so interested in this project is because of Zach Cregger, the director behind this. Now, obviously, we've had at least 6 Resident Evil films within the Paul W.S. Anderson universe, which, depending on who you talk to, are either super fun films or just trash. We had that other Resident Evil film from 2021, Welcome to Raccoon City, which still remains one of the worst adaptations I've ever seen and just a trash film in general. So with Cregger's line of work being Barbarian and Weapons, he has a very unique flair when it comes to approaching horror and doing things that are expected but unexpected at the same time, while also implementing humor as well. Now, I don't know how much of his flavor he's going to implement into this new Resident Evil, because Resident Evil as a franchise, it definitely has its atmosphere, its fear, and the action as well. But depending on which era of Resident Evil you're going into, if you're going for the first game and maybe Code Veronica, you got that slower, more atmospheric kind of vibe. But then when you go from 2 onwards, and especially 6 when they went off the rails, there's definitely a lot more action involved. So I'm wondering, since this is technically not going to be focusing on any key character from the games, but be a set of original characters in its own story that takes place within the Resident Evil universe, I'm wondering how this new cast of characters are going to fit into the grand scheme of things. If there will be any sort of tangential links to, the main Resident Evil cast. And yeah, I just wonder what the tone is going to be like, because Resident Evil at its best, it can be creepy, it can be action-packed, but it also can be a little over the top and silly. If they find a way to blend all that together, I think this could be a good time. But I have hope that this is going to be a good one. I need this to be a good one because it's about damn time we had some good Resident Evil in live action and not just trash, you know? And then moving on to number 8, we have another video game adaptation in the form of Mortal Kombat 2. Now, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I am a defender of the 2021 film. I acknowledge that that film had problems. Believe me. It was a little too serious. There was too much focus on the new character Cole and the way in which it messed with certain elements of the Mortal Kombat lore when it came to, you know, arcanas and giving people abilities. And a few characters that didn't get the respect that they deserved in the first film. There was all those elements. But this was probably as close to a accurate portrayal of what Mortal Kombat should be in live action when it came to the special moves, the fatalities, seeing certain characters in costume, incorporating certain lore, and obviously having that OG theme song from the 90s film come back into this film and used as a leitmotif throughout. There was a lot of really cool things that they did in the film. It just needed some refinement. So with this film showing up in a few months from now, they're going to be doing the tournament. They're going to be introducing Johnny Cage, as well as a few other fan favorites like Kitana, Jade, Shao Kahn, and Baraka, and a few other people. And the trailer is looking pretty good. I'm not over the moon about it, but from what the director, producer, and a few other people have said about this film, they sound like they've taken on the criticisms of the previous film and are attempting to give us the film that we should have got back in 2021. I have to see how they're going to balance out the humor with the over-the-top, silly, crazy nature of Mortal Kombat, but that first trailer is looking pretty solid, and the test screenings from what I've read online when the film was shown indicates that this is going to be a solid entry for like video game adaptations. I could only hope, because I can't be dealing with another above average to not good Mortal Kombat film. We need a good entry, so I'm hoping that this is going to be a good time. At number 7, we have an entry that will be coming out in just around a week from now in the form of 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Now, 28 Years Later, the film from last year with Danny Boyle, I thought was a pretty good film. I know it caused a fair amount of controversy, especially with the way the film ended, but also in terms of its pacing, its tone, and how it handles certain elements of the story and characters. But I like the sort of gritty, weird, and funky nature of that previous film. And I was very curious to see where the story would go. So with there being at least 2 main trailers for The Bone Temple coming out, it seems like this is definitely going to be a continuation of what happened before. I'm just curious to see how, the main characters continue, what's going on with Ralph Fiennes, and a few other things with those other infected people that are lurking about. Okay, so now we move on to entry number 6, which is Project Hail Mary. Now, this is the next film from Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who obviously are well known for making Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, directing the Lego Movie, 21 and 22 Jump Street, and obviously producing the Spider-Verse films as well. So this is a big deal for them to step back into the directing chairs and see what they can do with this new film. Now, apparently, I think it's based on a book of some kind, and there was a reveal in the trailer which certain people who read the book said that it probably would have been nicer to see that reveal in the film itself, but from what I'm seeing in the trailer, it looks interesting. I thought it was going to be mostly serious, but there's definitely some elements of humor in there. I like Ryan Gosling, so I'll watch him in mostly anything. And again, just seeing Lord and Miller back again directing, I'm just curious to see how this film is going to turn out. And now we move on to the top 5, with my 5th entry being Avengers Doomsday. With last year taking Captain America out of the equation, Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four were actually pretty good, and it has started to swing the pendulum slightly back into the direction of interest. Now, at the time of recording, there have been at least 3 trailers that have been officially put out there for people to check out. Now, the 4th one apparently has been released in the cinema, but I have yet to see that one, even though it's leaked online. But I don't go around chasing leaked trailers anymore. I don't find that too interesting. But the Cap trailer, the Thor trailer, more interesting. The X-Men trailer, okay, you have my interest. And then with the Avengers, my hype levels are slowly increasing. And I want this to work because the MCU needs a frigging win. Everyone just keeps talking about there's been nothing good since the end of Phase 3, which again, incorrect, but also there's not been anything that's been of that same level of quality. And I have concerns because obviously the Russo brothers, their entries in the world of film post Endgame have not been that well received, and have brought into question whether they actually have, talent at all as directors outside of working with Marvel. So I kind of hope that they're going to be able to work with their other filmmakers to go about and make something that is truly fun, interesting, captivating, and can make us say, we believe in the MCU again. Either way, regardless of whether this is going to be a good time or a disaster, I'm going to be there, because the amount of people that they've got in this film is mental. And it's going to be a juggling act of the highest proportions. An ensemble cast of that level, oh God, this could be disaster, it could be brilliant. I want to believe, so I have my fingers crossed for this one. And then at number 4, we have Disclosure Day. Now, this film debuted on the internet not too long ago, so this is a fairly recent entry. Up until December, I didn't even know this film existed. But it shot very high up into my top 5 because that first trailer was very eerie, very weird, and right up my street. And plus, this is the first film from Steven Spielberg in a while, and I'm like, okay, let's see what's going on. Steven Spielberg returning to the world of sci-fi with a very interesting cast, especially with Emily Blunt playing that news reporter, having that moment where she just sort of stops and starts making these creepy, weird man noises that remind me of the aliens from Signs, except if it was more guttural. Obviously, Colin Firth is in there. There's a few other people in there that people recognize from modern, TV and film, but I'm not super familiar with who they are. But I like the tone of it. I like the elements of mystery and weirdness, so I'm in. I don't need to see any more, so I'm looking forward to seeing this when it drops in the summer, I think. Alright, and now we get into the top 3, and this is where things start to get way more interesting. At number 3, we have Spider-Man Brand New Day. So with this being the 4th entry of Spider-Man films in the MCU, I'm hoping that they're going to strike the right kind of balance between bringing him into being a more fully formed character that does street-based crime, but also dealing with some of these larger events. I really hope they're going to strike the balance and not make this feel like an overstuffed movie, because considering how many people have been listed to show up in this film, from, established MCU characters to some new people, I'm concerned. But again, I want to believe, because we have the director of Shang-Chi jumping in as the new director, stepping in from John Watts, and all the stuff I've been hearing about this film definitely has my ears perked up with, intrigue. So I need this film to be good. And then it comes to the top 2. Now, these two are kind of interchangeable. You know what? I'm going to make a change right now. Number 2 is Dune Part 3. Now, this was initially my top film of anticipation for this year, but there was something I saw last month that changed that a little bit for me. We'll get to that in a bit. But yeah, Dune Part 1 and 2 have been genuinely some of my favorite film experiences, especially when it comes to sci-fi. It's very rare these days that you get to see a sci-fi world that feels otherworldly, that feels very different from what you've seen before. And Denis Villeneuve, along with the talented writers, the costume designers, the VFX people, everybody, the actors, they've all come together to create this unique vibe that feels very different from what's out there, not only in the modern era of sci-fi action adventure movies, but also just in terms of sci-fi in general. And Dune Part 1, I know it wasn't for everybody. Some people felt like it felt a little shortchanged in terms of certain story and character development, but I feel like Dune Part 2 more than made up for it. It expanded the world, expanded the vibe. You got to learn a lot more about some of the other parties involved. It looked even more incredible than before. It sounded more incredible than before. And as a second half to Dune Part 1, it makes everything feel a little bit more whole, a little bit more textured. And I think I said it in my review before, but it bears repeating. Dune Part 2 was genuinely magical for me watching that in the cinema. I saw it twice, once in your standard screening and the second time in IMAX, and good lord, it looked incredible. It sounded incredible. And I know that Dune Part 3 is definitely, based on a book that fans of the books have said is the lesser of the source material. So they're wondering how the plot is going to work out and still be as satisfying as what's come before. So obviously Villeneuve, along with his team, have a task upon themselves to, make this as compelling as what's come before, and also make something that's satisfactory for, new and old fans alike. I need this to be good. I'm hopeful, but again, concerned. And then at number one, my most anticipated film for this year is The Odyssey. Now, most times you can't go wrong with Christopher Nolan. He is known as one of the best filmmakers in general for a reason. Most films that he makes are normally slam dunks for not only film fans but casual audiences as well. And while not everything he's made has been a complete slam dunk, I would say most of his filmography is worth celebrating and worth watching. And with The Odyssey, I was always curious about this film from the time that it was announced, with the cast, which has probably again one of the most impressive ensemble casts I've seen for a while. But the fact that this was going to be his first foray into fantasy, with this being based on the ancient Greek epic material, I just had to see what that would look like with Nolan's sensibilities. And the first teaser trailer that was dropped looked pretty cool. I was compelled. And then the first proper trailer came out and I was like, oh, this is all right. But when I went to see Avatar Fire and Ash in IMAX, they had an extended preview of this film. Now, apparently, from what I'd heard from a podcast I listened to, it was around 6 minutes long. And I won't go into the details of what took place in there, but you see a sort of set of clips here and there, but also an extended sequence. And good lord, the tension, the way it was filmed, the way things escalated, I was in. And it reminded me of certain elements I'd seen in previous Christopher Nolan films. And I'm like, this is the kind of filmmaking and this is the kind of stuff I like to see on screen being done with, again, Nolan's touch. So that sold me on the film way more than anything that's come before it. So I look forward to seeing this in IMAX and seeing what the crack is. So now I turn it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think of my top 10? And what are your top 10 most anticipated films for 2026? Whatever they are, drop them in the comment section below or hit me up on Instagram where I'm at either Hypersonic55 or at Film Focus. And yeah, you can obviously check the podcast out on places where podcasts can be found, whether you're talking about Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all those other places. And I will have a new review or topic of discussion to bring to you in the coming week or so just look out for that. But as always, thank you for listening, and until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out. Peace.